Julie, welcome to Saltier Politics. How are you doing?
I'm good. I just got my first vaccine shot. So, because I've had COVID, apparently it's supposed to hit you pretty badly if you've had it after the first shot. But so far, so good. It's been a few hours and I feel fine.
I
So,
walked to mine with a sense of hope. Did you have that kind of same hope as you were walking towards your shot?
no, because I had the antibodies. So I
Okay.
was told for being like, I'll get it because if I go to Spain this summer, which I'm supposed to, apparently you have to show proof of vaccination. So I'm doing it for that reason, and the reason also because doctors obviously recommend you get it regardless. But um, I've been tracking my antibodies through Mount Sinai through the study for the last year, so I know that I still have them. What I was pleasantly surprised about is I got my vaccine literally in Times Square, and with possibly the best view of Times Square I've ever seen in my life. It was on the second floor of this building, literally at 20 Times Square. So they make you wait about 15, 20 minutes or so after your shot just to make sure you don't have a reaction. So I'm sitting there with all of Times Square kind of stretched out before me, and it was completely empty and so depressing. And it looked like something out of an apocalyptic movie. It's very interesting to see how completely empty at 9 a.m. Times Square was and is on a
I
weekday. Both you and I worked when we worked at Fox, worked right off of Times Square, and sometimes it'd be impossible to walk through Times Square if you got off the subway there to walk to work. This was just kind of appalling in a very sad way, I thought.
I hope this summer is different because a lot of my single friends are very excited for being vaccinated, and the new pickup line will be, which vaccine did you get?
I got well. You got J&J? You said, right?
I got J&J. I had a bad reaction, but I'm just happy to be vaccinated. I don't care what I got. I was going to get the first one available.
Yeah, it's funny. I was supposed to get the Moderna one in a couple of weeks, and then I was literally listening to the radio this morning, and they said there's vaccines available, and I went on the website, which as of a week or two ago was almost impossible to find a vaccine, and there were, no joke, I don't know how many open vaccination spots available. I went online at 8 a.m. I had an appointment by 9 a.m. in Times Square. Like I didn't have to travel to the Bronx or Queens or anywhere else where a lot of my friends had to go a few weeks ago. It was super easy. And
Amazing.
I urge everybody to do it.
Truth. All right. It's been a very busy couple of news weeks, but I wanted to bring something up because you did a really interesting tweet about your experience, and I think you can bring a good perspective to this. But with all the Navalny news happening and him wanting to get better care because he's on a hunger strike, he's Putin's an opposition leader in Russia. And if you could kind of explain that tweet that you said about your injury and about the healthcare in Russia.
Yeah,
I thought that was really eye-opening.
it's a little unfair of me to compare because my injury happened in 1988. So, were you even born in 1988? I don't think you
Ni-
were.
1990.
Okay, so you were not yet born. But anyway, so this was a long time ago. But I was 15, and it was still the Soviet Union, and we went back to visit my grandparents because I don't know if we ever talked about this, but when my family left in 1980, my grandparents were not allowed to leave by the Soviet authorities because my grandfather had worked on the first Sputnik literally in the 1950s. And under the pretext of him knowing military secrets, which is insane because this was obviously 30 years later and he didn't know anything, they would not let my grandparents leave, which was very awful, but very par for the course in the way that the Soviets would punish people who wanted to leave by separating families and ensuring that they'd never see each other again. We had left in 1980, then Gorbachev came to power, and they had glasnost. And anyway, the countries began to open up a little bit, and so we were allowed back, which was wonderful to visit, which was wonderful because I was very close to my grandparents when I was little. They actually raised me until I left. We never thought we'd see them again, which was heartbreaking in ways that I really can't describe. Just awful. But anyway, so we took the opportunity, my mother and I did, to go back to Moscow for the first time in 8 years. And at that point, I was an American citizen, which plays into this because my grandfather and I went to go see to a museum, and we were at a subway station, a metro station in Moscow on our way to the museum. And the way metro stations in Moscow are built, they were built as bunkers. So they're very, very, very deep below ground. They were working on an escalator and an escalator rail. Either a workman had let go of the escalator rail, or something happened where the escalator rail jumped off the actual escalator and started kind of very quickly. And it was a very long rail because, as I said, the escalators are very deep underground, and started grooving towards me. And I don't remember much because I passed out, but it almost impaled me. I was very lucky. It went basically between my legs and chopped off a big chunk of my right leg. And
I had no idea about this. This is absolutely
talked
terrifying.
about this?
No.
Yeah. A little bit of my left leg, but a very big chunk of my right leg. So the leg that you have seen has had a lot of plastic surgery on it to try to reconstruct it, because it was basically hanging on by a thread. I woke up. I mean, I passed out immediately, lost consciousness, and I woke up basically to find myself in the arms of a Soviet policeman, which, if you had left the country and were persona non grata in the Soviet Union, is like your worst nightmare. And he was carrying me, and I was bleeding out. They took me to this little medic station they had in the subway station, where this kind of old toothless woman who was the medic there she didn't really touch me. She kind of was looking at me, but they were going to let me bleed out. I mean, I was very close to dying from just loss of blood, until I had the wherewithal to say I'm an American citizen. And as soon as I did, a bunch of plainclothes KGB guys showed up, and it became, a huge incident for them, because obviously I wasn't just some girl that they could let go to die. This was going to become an international incident, apparently. They really did not know what to do with me for a very long time. And eventually they called an ambulance and got me to a hospital. And from what I understood later, this hospital was the best hospital in Moscow that was kind of reserved for foreigners and maybe dignitaries and so on and so forth. This hospital was out of a third world nightmare. They literally took me to the basement of the hospital. There was water dripping from the ceiling. There was a woman next to me who was kind of raving. They gave her a tetanus shot. Then they took the tetanus needle and put it in hot water, and then gave me the same shot with the same needle. And don't forget, this is 1988, and I was 15. Guess who was completely paranoid about AIDS at the time, because that's all we were ever taught to be in the 80s. So I'm thinking, oh my God, if I don't die from blood loss, I'm going to die from AIDS, which luckily did not happen. And then they sewed me up, and they sewed me up without any painkillers and without nothing. I mean, forget Novocaine. I mean, nothing, in a very kind of medieval way. And it took hours for them to do it.
Did you just constantly pass out? I cannot imagine the pain.
I didn't pass out after the first time. And so I wish I had, because the pain was just so brutal that, let me tell you, 35 hours of childbirth was a cakewalk after that experience.
Oh my God.
But it was, I can't believe we never talked about this, but anyway, it was brutal and it was awful. And what's interesting about it is they wanted me to come back to this clinic to be checked out a few days later, but I couldn't walk. Basically, I was like, I need crutches. And this nurse looks at me like I'm crazy. And she goes, crutches? We have a war with Afghanistan going on. Our crutches are all in Afghanistan. This was in 1980. There's not a pair of crutches in all of Moscow for them to give me. And I went ballistic. I went crazy. And at the age of 15, just cursing. And luckily, my parents did a good job of maintaining my Russian. So I knew every curse word I could possibly come up with in Russian. But it's very funny because my Russian slang stops, in the mid 70s, which is when my parents' Russian slang stopped. So I kind of sounded like Austin Powers, but nevertheless. So it got to the point where they had to make me a pair of crutches because I was American. And these crutches, which I got 2 or 3 days later, were more painful to have than the leg itself. It was just awful. The whole experience is surreal and just brutal. So I will say this was over 30 years ago. They haven't changed their medical care. And I only raise this because I just had experience with the Russian medical system. Every time some Soviet dignitary or some now Russian dignitary has medical problems, they fly to Germany or they fly to Finland, which is really where they should have airbagged me out to if, I had the presence of mind to request it, but I obviously was 15 and I didn't. But they airvac you out to a Western country if you have, if you need a bypass surgery or something. I mean, if you're somebody of that ilk. And so what Navalny is dealing with in Russia, and let me stress again, this was quote unquote the best hospital in Moscow, where they couldn't provide a pair of crutches for me and they couldn't sew me up with any painkillers. This is not, I mean, what Navalny is dealing with is a penal colony clinic. He was perfectly healthy when he came out. I don't know if he was perfectly healthy. He'd been poisoned, but he was, I assume, somewhat healthy when he came home. He's a young man. He's younger than I am. He's in his 40s, early 40s, I think, or mid 40s. For him to have to deal with what he's dealing with in such a short period of time is they're literally murdering him slowly. I mean, they're just killing him. Being in some penal colony, in some clinic in a penal colony where quote unquote doctors who are probably as medically inept as, I was after ninth grade biology are working on him, is just, they're killing him. And the question to me, somebody asked me this other day, did he come home to die a martyr? And I think, yes, I think the question is, he could have stayed in Germany. He specifically came home to Russia because I think he made the calculus. Either he was going to start a revolution and overthrow Putin, or he was going to die a martyr. And if you saw the protests happening in Moscow and St. Petersburg and Irkutsk, I mean, there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Russians on the streets protesting what's happening to him, calling Putin a killer. Putin, I think, is going to probably invade Ukraine to divert attention away from all of this, and rally Russians around the flag and try the jingoist nonsense that he's tried many times, to divert attention away. The whole war with Chechnya was based on that kind of attitude, but what's happening to Navalny and the medical care that he's not receiving is incredibly troubling. And you will not convince me that in the last 30 years or 35 years since I experienced what I experienced, that the medical care in some penal colony in Russia has gotten any better than what I was treated to 3 decades ago in the best hospital in Moscow.
Do you think if Navalny dies, though, the movement will peter out?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think Putin is hoping that it will. Look, I mean, what Putin has done is effectively learned his lessons from the collapse of the Soviet Union, which is when Gorbachev launched what was known as glasnost, which was more freedom of speech, more whatever, it allowed people to really start discussing what was happening. And that led to discontent. It led to some of the Soviet republics, the Baltics first seceding and then the rest of them. And I think what Putin understands is that he learned his lesson from that, is that you control the media, you put an entire a gag order effectively on any dissent, you arrest people. I mean, they've arrested, I don't know how many protesters. And don't forget, when they release those protesters, they will be out of a job. I mean, they will be pariahs. It's going to be very hard for them. I know this because I know what my family went through, in the same kind of situation. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to take for Putin to go. You're also talking about a country that has not ever had a system of Western democracy, really, except for a few years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that left a bad taste in people's mouths because you transitioned from a planned economy to a capitalist economy, and a very small number of people got very, very, very rich, and other people, most people, lost everything financially and had to really made it very difficult for them to make ends meet. So people don't have fond memories of that. Russia's a very complicated place. And for the United States and for any of us, and I've always said this, we have this expectation that we're going to go, that people want to emulate our Western values and our democracy. And the reality is you have to have some sort of basis and culture for that to happen. And it has never happened in Russia. Really. I mean, they went from the czars to communism to a few years of Yeltsin to now this, which is certainly not democracy. So I don't know what's going to happen. I legitimately can't predict. It's going to be interesting to see if Navalny dies, and I suspect it's not going to end well for him. And the reason it's not going to end well for him is who's going to stop Putin? So Navalny dies, and even more so, he invades Ukraine. What's the West going to do about it? And that's what Putin's counting on. You know,
Right.
there is something to be done. We know where Putin's money is. We know where his allies' money is. We need to freeze it. They're in Western banks or in Western real estate. I mean, we know exactly where their money is parked. We just have to be prepared to go after it. And we have it. I mean, putting sanctions on Russia is only going to hurt Russians. You got to put sanctions on Putin himself. He's the wealthiest man in the world. I suspect we know where his assets are located. I guarantee the vast majority are not located in Russia. Go after it.
And that's actually when you were talking about your story, what struck me too is you didn't really get any help until you said you were an American citizen, which also shows how much regard they hold their own citizens.
None. Zero.
Because like, right, so if the sanctions or tariffs hurt the people day to day and their food is less, that's not going to impact Putin in the way if you just kind of strangle his pocketbook.
No, what Putin's going to say is the reason you're all suffering is because of the West, and that he's going to whip up this kind of jingoistic hatred towards the West. I mean, don't forget, the feelings towards the West and Russia today are not great because he's effectively, I mean, imagine if Fox News were under Trump the only media anybody had access to. That's effectively what you have under Putin, his version of Fox News.
That would be awful.
Well, that's really the only thing people see, so it's problematic.
Now to another problematic subject. Well, something good happened. Chauvin, he was convicted or found guilty on all 3 counts. But the same night, Ma'Khia Bryant, or same day, was shot by a police officer, a 16-year-old in Ohio. But I wanted to bring up one of my friends who's in the military. He texted me and said, in my opinion, crime will get worse. Cops will be afraid to do anything. You will see a lot more police die. What do you think about that?
You know, that's always been the excuse for everything. And reality is that cops are going to be afraid to do what? Put their foot on somebody for 9.5 minutes?
Right.
I mean, what I don't get about the whole situation, and I just had this discussion the other day with somebody. Okay, the guy was passing, you believe the guy was passing forged money, right? You arrest him, you throw him, you put handcuffs on him, you put him in the police car, he somehow wiggles out. Like, he is uncontrollable, but now he's in handcuffs. And there are several of you and there's one of him. You tell me that you can't physically restrain this guy? That's what I don't get. What are you going to be? Cops are going to be afraid to do what? To restrain somebody who's out of control, who has handcuffs on him? You restrain him. You don't restrain him by putting your foot on him for 9.5 minutes. You restrain him.
Right.
That's the whole thing. You need to do this. He wasn't shooting at you. This wasn't a, either he dies or I die kind of situation where, in the heat of the moment, maybe you thought your life was in danger. Your life's not in danger. You're just being an asshole.
You just need to act better. You don't need to take out all of your whatever racial frustrations or whatever on the person that you've apprehended.
It's not even let's even give everybody the benefit of the doubt and say this isn't racial, which of course we all know it is, but let's give Derek Chauvin every benefit of the doubt. George Floyd was acting poorly. He was out of control. They had a hard time restraining him. It had nothing to do with the fact that he was black. Like, I'm going to give Derek Chauvin every benefit of the doubt. By the way, the benefit of the doubt that black kids, especially men, never get. But okay, let's give him every benefit of the doubt. Still, what exactly does your friend think cops are going to be afraid to do going forward? Put their foot on somebody for 9.5 minutes until they die? Like, what exactly are we constraining the future Derek Chauvins of the world from doing?
I completely agree. And I think the same arguments are used with male bosses in the workplace. It's like, now we're being watched. How can we lead? Because we have to be so careful. You just have to change and not do the shitty stuff. if you're not going to harass somebody or treat somebody less than and just do the job like and be a human, you're going to be fine. If police follow the rule book and they don't go out of line and do like what Derek Chauvin did, there shouldn't be an issue. It's just it's not going to be the same. You're not going to get away with as much. This situation is changing.
Well, and let me just go even a step further on this. It's exactly this, it's the Pence rule, right? Well, now that women are being like this and they're accusing men of sexual harassment, I guess that's going to lead to men not wanting to be in the room with women anymore. Why are you putting the onus on the victim here?
Right.
Why don't you try not acting like a jerk? Because I guarantee you that if I had a one-on-one with Mike Pence and he wasn't hitting on me or harassing me, I wouldn't accuse him of harassment, right? Like, it's this nonsense of, well, this is going to lead to fewer women being hired or fewer minorities being hired because now everybody wants to like defend their rights, and basically white men are scared because they're under attack all the time. No, they're not. No, they're not. I have worked with white men for the last 30 years. Literally, everybody I've worked with for the most part has been a white man. And guess what I haven't done? Accused 99.99999% of them of bad behavior because there's no reason to. And sometimes even when there is reason to, I haven't. So to say that it's somehow the burden is on these poor men, like Derek Chauvin, is absurd. How about you just don't kill somebody for passing a counterfeit bill? How do you go from passing a counterfeit bill to literally killing somebody?
Exactly. And I also wanted to bring up, so I don't know if you saw the Tucker clip where he blamed the protests outside of the courthouse for persuading the jury to convict with the guilty verdicts. I just think that the Republicans are using the wrong arguments to persuade people about the point. I think they could be using all the police shootings as way, hey, this is why we can't defund the police. This is why we need to put more funds into the police to help them protect us with training. But they're now just going about this in a completely racist and terrible way that isn't moving the conversation forward at all. It's just giving dog whistles.
What's apparent to me, and I don't know if it's always been there and I was just naive to it, or whether Donald Trump has kind of given people permission to be more vocal about it. I've been living in my little bubble in the Northeast for a very long time. And by the way, I will be the first to say places like Boston, where I went to college and graduate school, probably the most segregated, one of the most racist places on earth. So I'm not defending the Northeast as some paragon of racial reconciliation. But what I find so fascinating is that people are saying the crazy part out loud. And maybe it's better that they're finally coming clean about it. Maybe it's better that people are actually saying what they're saying. But I mean, some of the stuff that I'm hearing, and I don't watch Fox much, but some of the stuff I heard Tucker say or Greg Gutfeld said about, the Chauvin verdict, it's just, it's bizarre to me that people my age think this, right?
I mean, logically, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. And I'll say this about Tucker, who I know, I used to spend a lot of time with Tucker Carlson. He's always just had his blind spot when it comes to race. I mean, this isn't an act for him. He just, and it's not just race, it's ethnicity, it's all of it. He just feels that way. Greg, I think, doesn't. I think Greg will say whatever it takes to, stay in Suzanne Scott's good graces. But Tucker really does believe this stuff. It's just, it's very weird.
It makes me very happy that I am no longer in that environment.
But it is fascinating. The one thing I'll say, it is fascinating to be in that environment and to see it up close, because it really is how half the country thinks.
Yep. I think the logical Republicans, and there are so many of them, they're not like that, and but it kind of closes a lot of people's minds off, and they're like, all Republicans are like this, or like what Tucker said, and that's not true. And I think like also working on Fox, I've learned that too, and that you can have, and what you did on Fox is have logical conversations with people and be like, hey, here are the facts. And kind of move the needle a little bit. But now it's either just polar opposite. You're either like way on the Tucker side, or there's no really voice for those moderates, I feel. I don't know what you think about that.
I think everything's become a Twitter war, so there's no critical thinking
Mm-hmm.
in parts of the world anymore. And that's really frustrating to me because issues of race are complicated, and it's not and they're historical in the sense that you really have to understand where they come from and how they come from. I mean, I've been a little bit paying attention to critical race theory, whatever the hell these people are talking about when it comes to New York City private schools. That I understand that right-wing media is just going ballistic over, and first of all, it's fascinating. None of the people at Fox who've been going crazy about what they say are happening in New York City private schools, I think, have kids in those schools, so they don't really know what's going on. They're just getting the top lines from the New York Post or wherever, some, disgruntled parent. I actually do have a kid in one of those private schools, and I do know a little bit about this. And they're so off the mark that it's insane. Like, what they are putting out there as what's being taught versus what's actually being taught is insane. It's just completely disconnected from reality. And there are lots of issues to take up with private schools in terms of, legacy admissions and admissions with respect to, money. There are plenty of things to be critical about in terms of equity with respect to private schools, but somehow saying that New York City private schools have not historically benefited the wealthiest, whitest among us is crazy. It's crazy. And to watch what's happening in right-wing media, especially when it comes to people who have never set foot in one of these schools, don't have children in these schools, don't really understand what's being taught in these schools, to suddenly get on their high horse about critical race theory is amazing to me. And I say this as the white mother of a white son in one of those schools. It's amazing to me. P.S. I'm not offended as the white mother of a white son in one of those schools. So it would be very nice if the Fox and Friends of the world weren't offended on my behalf, because they don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Yep. And I think it's the same thing like when they talk about a trans bathroom issue. I don't think they freaking met any trans people to determine whether they're dangerous or not. They just don't know anything about it. So then they spout from a place of complete ignorance. And I think that's what they're doing exactly right here with the private school issue.
By the way, I have met trans people, and I do know one who's used the same ladies' room as I have, and guess what? Couldn't care less.
Exactly.
Couldn't care less.
Right. It's like, exactly. The people who do care too much are the ones who just know absolutely nothing about it, because it's not anything to be an issue. It's a non-issue.
You know what I always think about with respect to trans? Okay, so let's take it to its logical conclusion. You as a woman don't feel comfortable if somebody who's trans is using if Caitlyn Jenner were using the ladies' room, right? Because Caitlyn Jenner in your mind was born a man. She was born Bruce Jenner. So therefore somehow Caitlyn Jenner is going to not be able to contain herself and is going to somehow sexually assault me, right? Okay. You believe that. Are you also saying that applies to lesbians as well? Because does that mean that if lesbians and straight women share a bathroom, that the lesbian is not going to be able to contain herself, is going to somehow sexually assault the straight woman in the bathroom because of her sexual urges towards that? Like, where is the craziness going to end?
No, and you know
right?
what the thing is too? It's like I remember coming out when I was younger because I did sports my whole life and like being in locker rooms. I was always just it was part of the reason I stayed in the closet because I was scared to death that like other females would think somehow I am like a predator, which is not at all. But I mean, like, so now I think the trans person is the most afraid one about what everybody else is feeling. When at the end of the day, you're just changing or you're just going to the bathroom.
I
It's
mean,
terrible.
what the hell are they talking about? And again, like it's who's offended by this? People who don't know anything about this.
Exactly.
By the way, I guarantee you've used a public bathroom in New York City. You've been in the bathroom with a trans person. You just have. You may not realize that the person is trans, but you have, or a non-binary person.
A
You
million
have.
percent. A million
And
percent.
and by the way, has anybody attacked you in that bathroom?
Nope.
No. No. I
Everybody
mean,
just wants to get in and out. That's it.
guess what I do when I go to the bathroom? I do my business, I wash my hands, I get out of there.
Right. No
So do
dawdling.
you. I mean, like, maybe put on some lipstick if I'm in the mood. That's about it.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
don't. I don't understand. I don't understand. It's the same stuff with this crazy critical race theory nonsense. With these private schools in New York, like, what do you don't even know what you're talking about.
Exactly. Like,
You don't.
has your son been impacted at all?
You know how my son's been impacted? Yesterday, my son came home and he said, "You know what? Instead of doing writing yesterday, we spent some time talking about um, George Floyd." Now he's in third grade, and I said, "Really? What did you guys talk about?" And he told me facts about the George Floyd case that I wasn't aware of, actually. Just facts, not opinion, just facts. I was like, that's fascinating. You know what? You know more about this case than I do. And then we had a very long discussion as to what kind of sentence he thinks that Derek Chauvin should get versus what kind of sentence I think Derek Chauvin should get. And um, that was, you know what? If they want to take a couple of minutes, that instead of focusing on writing that day, they're going to talk about George Floyd, I am more than okay with that. In fact, I should write a note to his teachers. I'm grateful they did that. You know why?
That
I'm
that's real world.
pretty positive he's going to still learn how to write today or tomorrow.
Right. But those are real world conversations that you're learning to have at such a young age, which is so important because I know in when I was that young, I wasn't having those conversations in my school. And I think those are the kind of tools that help you as you get older to be able to talk about difficult topics. Because if you've been doing it since you've been in third grade and younger, you can articulate a lot of challenging issues really well. But if you're just learning, which I think so much of the population is, when you're in your 30s or 40s, whatever, it's really freaking hard and difficult. So
And
I
yeah,
think the
and
education is better.
yeah, and what I thought was fascinating is all these 8 and 9-year-old kids had a discussion since Chauvin wasn't sentenced yesterday. He's going to be sentenced in a couple of months. What they thought, based on the facts that they discussed, um, what they thought he should get as a sentence. And there were huge disparities, apparently, of opinion. So it wasn't that the teacher was indoctrinating them saying, throw the book at this guy or he should walk or whatever. They're like, okay, did he really mean to do that? Like they had this discussion, the kids among themselves. Do we think he really meant to kill him? Do we think he kind of killed him because he didn't care? Was it an accident? Like that's what critical thinking is. I love
And
it. I think it's amazing.
yeah,
I
and
think
having
it's
compassion for both sides too.
Yeah, and it wasn't like, oh, you know what? Let's all sit here in lockstep and say George Floyd angel because George Floyd and it's so fascinating because my son said, yeah, apparently the guy at the convenience store or whatever store where George Floyd was passing the money who called the cops, um, uh, said that this was the biggest regret of his life that he called the police on him, which led to George Floyd's death. And that was like a really big topic for these kids. Are like, that's a big regret. A small action that you take can lead to some really big consequences in a really real life way that I think they'd never thought about before. And I didn't think about that. These are all things that I just, you gotta, at my age, you kind of think about it and then you move on. Like, this is like eye-opening for them. Wow. So this guy did something that he thought was right. He thought a crime was being committed. He called the police, and now his biggest regret in life is calling in a crime because it led to the death of this man who obviously he didn't want to see killed. And this was like a huge thing that they among themselves, not even, I think this started the discussion in school, but then kind of he talked to me about it, and he's not the kind of kid, as that sits there and self-reflects on this kind of stuff much.
No.
So, I think it's great. That's the kind of critical race theory that they're teaching in these elite private schools in New York City, Fox and Friends.
Oh my God, that actually is such a relief. That makes me have faith in schooling in the youth today, because I read on BuzzFeed about how people were ranking popularity now, and it was like in middle school the popular girls are the ones with the biggest TikTok following, and I'm like, where is society going? Where? And then to hear this and what your son, the conversation that you two had, that is an intellectual conversation, and I can get behind that. And you've given me hope, Julie.
Well, he's not in middle school yet, so let's not go crazy.
Okay.
He also did inform me that college is now optional because he could just be a big YouTube star instead, which, as you can imagine, my head began to explode.
Oh.
The words are out of his head. So less we think everything is fantastic.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But no, I mean, I only raise this stuff to say that it's my frustration generally about and let me stress, I loved my time at Fox in the sense that I loved debating people, I loved talking politics, but my big problem was always that there were times when I had to debate people who actually never worked in the business and didn't know what the hell they were talking about. And I, who'd worked in the business for a really long time, I mean, they were entitled to their opinion, no problem, but it's like me debating a lawyer about the law because I watch a lot of watch a lot of Law and Order. Like I'm not a lawyer. I never tried a case, but I watch a lot of Law and Order, so I think I can go and debate,
right,
Andy Napolitano about the Constitution. Like, I can't. You know why? Because I've never studied the Constitution the way he has. And so that was kind of my frustration, where you had all these, people they sometimes put me up against, and I was like, but you don't know what you're talking about because you've actually never worked in this business. And this is exactly the same kind of frustration that I have when it comes to what they're talking about here. You actually don't know anything about what these schools are teaching. You've just read a blog post by some disgruntled father whose daughter goes early. And
probably a father who hasn't had a full conversation, because again, like what you just said about your conversation with your son, is they were weighing about, what kind of sentence should Chauvin get, and what was the intention behind it. Like, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. You're not just saying everything about the police is wrong, let's defund them. It's not this narrative that is completely fake. They're weighing both sides. They're seeing humanity and empathy in both, which is what you want to teach kids to do.
Yeah, and I have to say, the one thing I have found with kids, and I can only speak about the kids that my son hangs out with. I don't know what goes on anywhere else. So I'm, again, unlike other people, I'm not going to talk about what goes on in other schools. I just know about what's going on in mine. And not just his school, but his preschool, basically his whole situation. I think they're teaching kids about kindness in ways that we were never taught. You have kids who are very sensitive to bullying and are sensitive to mistreatment and maltreatment in ways that certainly I never was when I was little, and I don't think most people I know were. And I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. And I hope it goes on. I hope it continues. Middle school is a tough, tough time in people's lives. It always is. But I really hope that these kind of foundational years in lower school will teach them, elementary school will teach them to have that kind of compassion and that kind of critical thinking when it comes to how they treat people down the road. I think it's really important, and I'm glad they're teaching it.
Agreed. Well, I learned something in this conversation as well. Okay. So, Julie, what's making you salty this week or these past couple weeks?
What is making me salty the last couple of weeks? What's making me salty is where people like Ted Cruz actually have this great phrase where he stood up at a press conference with Lindsey Graham, of all people, and Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee, and said the following. You didn't see Republicans when we had control of the Senate try to rig the game. You didn't see us try to pack the court. They left Scalia's seat open for how long?
Yeah. Merrick Garland is Attorney General, not a justice right now. So.
Yeah. And then 5 seconds before the election, after Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies, they completely 180 flip and put a justice up. And by the way, let's say, I don't know, Stephen Breyer retires today. I mean, do we really believe that if the Republicans were in charge, they wouldn't hold that seat vacant for 4 years?
They absolutely would.
Of course they would. Of course they would.
Like, do they think people are stupid and don't have a memory, or what is the rhetorical, I guess, use of this? Like,
it's the base. It's the base. Yeah. It's just awful.
I just can't imagine you like still like right now if you're on Fox and then that soundbite has come off. Like, how do you even respond for that? I just imagine your face being like, what?
You know what's interesting? I don't know how much airtime I'd be getting on Fox if I were still there. I don't really see them giving a lot of airtime to people who don't toe the party line anymore, but maybe I'm wrong.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what I'm salty about is on 4/20, I had to write about the 22 years since Columbine and also 11 years since the Deepwater Horizon disaster. In both things, these anniversary days reminded me that the U.S. really is not learning from its mistakes. It both made me incredibly angry because then Columbine, not only am I watching the old footage, which is horrific, but then it's like in that time we've had a string of mass shootings and a string of mass school shootings, and now Columbine is like third on the list, and Virginia Tech is number one with deaths, and then Parkland, and then Newtown, and it's horrific. And then with the Deepwater Horizon disaster, 11 people died, but the environmental impacts are still felt today. And it's just like I wish America can do something to stem just the decay of both the environment and with guns. It makes me very sad.
Yeah. I mean, the good news is it looks like the NRA is going bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
The bad news is 25, 30 years ago, pre-Columbine, we're able to get the assault weapons ban passed, and that expired, and there's no gun safety legislation that can get support now. It's unbelievable.
Right.
Just amazing.
So that's our show for today.
On that happy note, I'm excited for the summer. It's not
oh my God, me too.
I'm excited for the weather. It's freezing in New York today.
It was awful. Today was awful. It was 34 and it was like 75 2 days ago.
Yeah, but eventually the summer will be here, spring will be here, and I'm very excited for that. Just to be able to get outside a little bit more.
Okay.
All right. That's our show.
All right.
Talk to you
Thanks,
later.
Julie. Alrighty.
Bye.
Bye.